The desert wind howls against the limestone casing of the Great Pyramid, a constant, abrasive rhythm in the dark. Inside the sterile laboratory, the silence is absolute. Dr. Sehlt leans into the eyepiece of the high-powered microscope, his breath hitching as he adjusts the focus. Beneath the lens lies a sliver of lung tissue, harvested 3 millennia ago. He blinks, wipes the glass, and looks again. The cells are not stagnant. They are reacting. They are shifting. Dr. Sehlt recoils, his chair scraping violently against the floor as he pushes back. He hits the wall, his hands trembling, his face drained of all color. He stumbles into the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, and shouts to his colleagues, "The mummy is alive! The tissue is still active!" He grabs the nearest researcher by the arm, his grip frantic, pointing back toward the lab. This is no hallucination. It is a biological anomaly that defies every law of decay. The tissue pulses under the light. To understand how a body could cheat the relentless march of time, we must step back into the shadow of the Nile. For the ancient architects of the desert, death was never a final curtain. It was a doorway to a more vibrant existence, a transition that demanded preparation. They viewed the human spirit as a complex architecture, divided into 2 vital components, the Ba and the Ka. The Ba was the personality, the essence that could travel beyond the tomb, while the Ka was the life force, the spark that required sustenance and a home. These 2 parts of the soul were not ethereal ghosts drifting in the void. They were tethered to the physical world. They required a vessel to anchor themselves in the afterlife. If the body perished, if the physical form crumbled into dust, the soul would vanish into the eternal dark. Thus, the preservation of the physical body became the ultimate act of survival. It was not merely a ritual for the dead, but a desperate, calculated necessity for the living. They saw the sky as the goddess Nut, her body arched over the earth, swallowing the sun each evening to birth it anew at dawn. This cycle of death and rebirth was the cosmic blueprint. To them, the body was the only bridge between the mortal world and the infinite horizon. Yet, the blueprint for their immortality lay in the blood-soaked myth of Osiris. He was the first king, the ruler of the living, until his own brother, Set, turned against him. In a calculated act of betrayal, Set murdered Osiris and tore his body into 14 pieces, scattering them across the length of the Nile. It was a final, absolute destruction. But the story did not end in the dust. His wife, Isis, refused to let the void claim him. She traveled the riverbanks, searching, gathering every fragment, and binding them back together. She breathed life into the cold, reassembled form, performing the first rites of preservation. This was the turning point of human history. His resurrection as the god of the underworld proved that death was not a wall, but a hurdle. It was a triumph of will over decay. Every Egyptian looked to this divine precedent as their own roadmap. The preservation of the body was the only way to claim that same victory. The myth of Osiris was a promise, but the path to that divine state was paved with cold, unyielding labor. The transition from the temple's incense to the embalmer's workshop was a descent into a different kind of silence. Here, the air was heavy, thick, with the sharp, biting scent of salt and dried resins. The light did not dance. It clung to the limestone walls. This was the place where hope met the blade. The priests who entered this space did not speak of gods or light. They spoke of chemistry, of temperature, and of the slow, deliberate extraction of the mortal coil. The atmosphere was sterile, detached. Every movement was calculated. Every action, a measured step toward a goal that defied the natural order. The transition from the vibrant myth of resurrection to the stark reality of the workshop was jarring. There was no room for error here. The priests moved with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. They were preparing it for a war against time itself. The work began with a cold, metallic precision. A priest took a long, curved bronze hook and inserted it deep into the nostril. He pushed upward, piercing the thin bone of the ethmoid, entering the cranial cavity. With a rhythmic, grinding motion, he shattered the delicate structures inside. He twisted the tool, liquefying the brain matter, then tilted the head forward to let the gray, viscous fluid drain out through the nose. There was no hesitation in his hands. Once the skull was hollowed, the focus shifted to the torso. A sharp obsidian blade traced a precise line along the left flank. The skin parted without resistance. One by one, the internal organs were extracted. The lungs, the liver, the stomach, and the intestines were pulled from the cavity, each glistening and heavy. They were washed in palm wine and coated in resin, then placed into 4 distinct stone jars. The chest cavity was left empty, save for the heart, which remained in place to be weighed against the feather of truth. The body was now a shell, stripped of the soft tissues that invited rot. The process was brutal. mechanical, and absolute. Every organ was accounted for, every cavity cleaned. The body was now a hollowed frame, ready for the final, grueling stage of its transformation. Priests carried the remains to a large stone basin filled with a coarse white powder. This was natron, a naturally occurring salt harvested from the dry lake beds of the Wadi Natrun. They lowered the body into the basin, packing the substance into every cavity and covering the skin until it was completely buried beneath the crystalline mound. The reaction was immediate and relentless. The salt began to draw the moisture from the tissues, pulling the water from the skin and muscle in a slow, agonizing process of dehydration. For 70 days, the body remained submerged in this caustic bath. The environment in the chamber was stifling, smelling of sharp minerals and the faint, lingering scent of the desert. When the 70 days finally passed, the priests cleared the salt away. What remained was a rigid, leather-like relic. The body was propped upright against a wooden frame, facing the rising sun. It was stiff, a dark and hardened shell that held no warmth. The priest stepped forward, his hands steady, holding the adze, a tool shaped like a serpent. He approached the face, the metal cold against the desiccated skin. He pressed the adze against the eyes, then the nose, and finally the mouth. There was no sound as the tool made contact, only the faint rasp of metal against dried tissue. He repeated the motion, reciting the incantations in a low, rhythmic drone that vibrated in the small, stone-walled chamber. He touched the lips with a ritual chisel, forcing them to part. The air in the tomb grew heavy, thick with the scent of burning resin and ancient dust. He leaned in, his face inches from the rigid, unmoving features. He whispered the final words, a command to the soul to return and inhabit its vessel. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing against the ears like deep water. In that stillness, the living priest waited, his eyes fixed on the mouth of the dead. The heavy silence of the tomb dissolved into the hum of a sterile laboratory. Dr. Sehlt leaned over the eyepiece of a high-powered microscope, his focus fixed on a sliver of lung tissue, extracted from the mummy. The slide was illuminated by a harsh white light that cut through the darkness of the room. He adjusted the fine focus knob, his fingers steady, until the cellular structure snapped into clarity. He blinked, then leaned closer. The tissue was not inert. Beneath the lens, microscopic enzymes were shifting, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic motion that defied the passage of 3 millennia. Sehlt recoiled, his chair scraping violently against the linoleum floor. The sound echoed off the cold, metal walls. He stood abruptly, his pulse visible in his neck, and stumbled into the hallway. He gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white, and shouted to his colleagues, "The mummy is alive! The tissue is still active!" He grabbed a technician by the arm, pulling them toward the lab. This was no hallucination. It was a biological anomaly that shattered the established laws of decay. The enzymes were not just preserved, they were functional. The laboratory lights flickered, casting long, sharp shadows against the walls. Dr. Sehlt stared at the slide, but his mind drifted to the vast, wind-swept plains beyond the city. The desert wind howls against the limestone casing of the Great Pyramid, a sound that has remained unchanged for 3 millennia. This is the true scale of the Egyptian ambition. They did not merely build tombs, they constructed a barrier against the inevitable erosion of memory. The biological remnants beneath the lens are not anomalies to be feared. They are the physical proof of a deliberate, calculated defiance. The pulse of a heart is fleeting, a rhythm that stops when the breath leaves the body. But the Egyptians sought a different kind of endurance. They understood that to be forgotten is the only true death. By anchoring the soul in stone, in gold, and in the chemical preservation of the flesh, they force the future to look back. The sands of Egypt still hold secrets, shifting with every gust of wind to reveal what lies beneath. Each grain of sand is a witness to the empires that rose and fell, yet the names of the builders persist. Modern science may map the enzymes and analyze the natron, but it cannot measure the weight of that intent. The mystery remains, buried in the dark, silent chambers, where the past refuses to fade. It is waiting, preserved in the dust, watching the world turn and refusing to be forgotten.